The night they accused me, the smell of smoke still clung to the wind, drifting through the broken windows of the interrogation room. I'd just come from identifying my own alibi on a map, miles away, in a diner off Highway 47, but they didn't care. They stared at me like I'd lit the match myself, like the flames that swallowed that school were already reflected in my eyes. They said I ran, that I hid, that witnesses saw a figure matching my description. One detective leaned in so close I could smell the ash on his clothes when he whispered, "We know you did it." My entire body felt hollow. The kind of hollow that makes breathing feel like theft. People I'd known for years turned away the moment my name hit the news. Even my own family, the ones who should have fought for me, stepped back as if innocence were contagious and guilt were a stain. And when the judge read the verdict, 22 years, it felt like the world closed its fist around my throat. That night, in a cell that wasn't mine, I made one promise: one day the truth would rise, and I'd bring down everyone who buried me. Before we continue the story, tell me in the comments which country you're watching from. I love seeing where my stories reach around the world. The flames were still painting the sky orange when the sirens cornered me. I wasn't anywhere near the school. I was standing outside Miller's Diner with a half-finished cup of coffee, watching smoke rise miles down the road like some kind of silent disaster unfolding in another man's life. I didn't even know what had happened yet. I didn't know children were crying in the parking lot, or that teachers were digging through rubble with bleeding hands. But the moment the police cruiser screeched into the lot, doors slamming, everything shifted. Hands where I can see them. I remember blinking at the officer, confused, thinking there was some kind of fugitive behind me. But their stares were locked onto me alone, sharp, hungry, already convinced. Where were you at 1:17 a.m.? A strange time. A calculated question. I told them the truth. I'd been here since a little after midnight, nursing coffee and trying to clear my head after a 14-hour shift. The waitress had refilled my cup twice. The cashier had joked about me moving in. There were cameras. Witnesses. Time-stamped receipts. None of it mattered. A detective in a wrinkled suit stepped forward, eyes flat. "We have a witness who saw a man matching your description running from the school grounds before the fire started." Matching my description. A phrase that has destroyed more innocent lives than lies ever could. They cuffed me before I could process it, cold steel biting into skin still warm from the diner's coffee. People watched through the windows, their faces a mix of shock and something uglier, confirmation. As if they'd always suspected I had some darkness in me, waiting for the right night to erupt. At the station, smoke clung to the officers like a scent they carried on purpose, a reminder of what I was being accused of. A school, an entire school, burned to its bones. And they wanted me to be the monster behind it. The interrogation wasn't a conversation. It was a funeral for my future. Every question was a shovel of dirt. You had grievances with the administration. You've been seen arguing with teachers. You were fired from your maintenance job last year. You know how buildings work. How fires spread. Every statement framed me tighter, like they were building a cage out of my own history. By sunrise the news had my name. By noon, the town had turned me into a pyromaniac. By evening my life, the one I'd built piece by piece, had burned hotter than the fire they claimed I lit. The school was ashes. And they were already preparing to make me the match. They let me make one phone call before transferring me to county. I dialed my sister because she always picked up, even when we were fighting. This time it rang so long I could hear my own pulse in the gaps. When she finally answered, her voice sounded distant, as if she were speaking from another world entirely. "Tell me it isn't true," she said. No greeting. No breath. Just that. "It's not," I replied. "I was at Miller's Diner. They have cameras. Receipts. People saw me." She cut me off. "The news said they're sure. They said a witness saw someone who looked like you. The school. It's gone, you know. All those kids barely made it out." Something inside me twisted. Not just at the fire, the horror of it, but at the way she said they're sure, like stranger's certainty weighed more than my voice ever could. "Please," I whispered. "You know me?" A long silence. Then, "I don't know what to believe." Those words hit harder than the cuffs, harder than the interrogation, harder than every lie layered on my name. I didn't know the heart could bruise, but mine did then, deep purple lasting. I called my mother next, praying her voice would anchor me. She didn't answer. Not the first time. Not the fifth. Not ever again after that day. Later I'd learned she told people she was waiting for more information, as if her own son were a headline, not blood. My father's number didn't ring at all. It went straight to voicemail, the digital equivalent of a slammed door. The worst part was the speed. Family bonds weren't severed. They evaporated. By evening, the prosecutor used their silence like a weapon. If even his family won't speak for him, he stated, that tells you everything. Everyone nodded. No one questioned it. The next morning, guards escorted me to my holding cell. A reporter in the hallway snapped a photo, and the flash washed over me like a punishment. The headline came hours later. Arsonist in custody, family refuses comment. Refuses. Like I was asking for a favor instead of begging for truth. I had always believed families stood firm in storms. But the fire that destroyed the school had done more than consume a building. It had burned the bridge back home. And in that smoke, I realized something I wasn't ready to face. I was alone. Utterly, terrifyingly alone. But even in that loneliness, a sharp ember lit inside me, a promise that one day, they would regret turning away before the truth could speak. County jail was only the waiting room. Real prison, the one they sent me to after the conviction, felt like stepping into a world built entirely out of echoes and concrete. The air always carried the faint scent of scorched dust, something dry and metallic, and every time I inhaled it, I was dragged back to the night of the fire. They didn't just lock me up. They locked me inside the smell of the crime I didn't commit. My first cellmate sized me up before I even dropped my mattress onto the frame. "You the school guy?" he asked. I didn't answer. Turns out, I didn't have to. Everyone already knew. Prison walls were good at carrying stories, especially ones that made you a villain. Some inmates looked at me with disgust, others with curiosity, a few with admiration, twisted in all the wrong ways. One guard spit every time he walked past my door, as if acknowledging my existence contaminated his uniform. Another would slam his baton along the bars and mutter, "Should have given you life." I learned quickly that silence was safer than truth. Truth didn't matter in here. Truth was a luxury for free people. But nights were a different enemy. I'd lie on that thin mattress, staring at the dark ceiling, listening to distant shouting, metal clanging, footsteps pacing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flames dancing across the school roof, even though I had never seen the fire in person. My mind built the image from news clips, from the trial, from the prosecutor's voice dripping with certainty. You knew the layout. You had motive. You were seen fleeing the scene. Lies layered so neatly they sounded like facts. The appeals process felt like a cruel joke. Each rejection letter arrived crisp and official, as if the paper itself was proud to crush me. Lawyers stopped taking my calls. Freedom became a memory, not a possibility. But prison has a way of turning you into someone you don't recognize. I hardened. I quieted. I observed. I became the kind of man whose emotions didn't move unless he allowed them to. I rebuilt myself in a place designed to break people. There was one moment I remember more clearly than any other, my 10th year inside. A guard tossed a newspaper onto my bunk. The headline read something about a new school opening on the same land where the first had burned. No mention of me. No mention of the case. No mention of the man still rotting in a cell for a crime he didn't commit. It hit me then the world had moved on. If I ever wanted the truth to rise, I'd have to drag it out myself. But I had nothing. No allies. No evidence. No hope. At least, that's what I believed. Until the day I met the man in the green custodial uniform, the one person in that entire hell who looked at me without judgment, the stranger who would keep me breathing when no one else cared if I did. He appeared so quietly in my life that at first, I barely registered him, just another worker pushing a cleaning cart down the tier, mop handle jutting out like a tired flag. Most guards treated him like furniture. Inmates ignored him. But he noticed everything. The kind of man who moved slow because he was listening. His name was Calder, though everyone called him Cal. Mid-50s. Weathered hands. A limp like he'd spent half his life walking on uneven ground. He wasn't intimidating, not in the way prison demanded. But there was something in his eyes, calm, steady, almost patient. The kind of gaze that didn't flinch when it met mine. The first time he spoke to me, it was because he'd seen me staring at an old burn mark scorched into the concrete wall near the showers. Just a stain, but fire had a way of hollowing me out. "Smoke's a stubborn thing," he said, pausing his cart. "Gets in places you can't scrub clean." I didn't reply. I didn't talk to anyone. Talking made things real. Cal didn't push. He just nodded and kept walking, as if he understood more from my silence than most people did from my words. Days passed. Weeks. Every time he worked our block, He stopped nearby, fixing something that didn't need fixing, a squeaky hinge, a loose bolt, lingering just long enough to create a pocket of quiet in a place built on chaos. One afternoon, after a fight broke out 2 cells down and the whole tier went into lockdown, he slipped a small packet through my bars as he passed. "Tea," he murmured. "For the nerves." I almost laughed at the absurdity, tea, in a place where knives were carved from toothbrushes. But when the lights dimmed and I steeped it in a cup I'd traded cigarettes for, the warmth hit something deep inside me. It was the first kind thing anyone had done for me in years. He didn't ask about my case until months later. We were alone in the hallway, he was replacing a broken light panel, and I was mopping the floor for work duty. The sort of moment no one would remember. "You didn't start that fire?" he said, not as a question, but as a statement. I froze. "You don't know that." Calder leaned on the mop handle, studying me like a mechanic studies a motor that's making a noise only he can hear. "I've seen guilty men," he said quietly. "Seen how they carry their story, all twisted and defensive, like they're wrestling their own shadow. But you carry grief, not guilt." My throat tightened. I'd spent a decade being treated like a monster, and somehow this stranger saw the one truth no one else ever bothered to look for. I whispered, I was miles away. I told them. They didn't care. He nodded slowly. "Then you hold on to that. One day, truth that strong finds light." I wanted to believe him. But hope was dangerous here. Still, his words sank into me like a nail anchoring a loose board. Cal never became a friend. Never called me anything but my last name. Never gave me softness, only steadiness. But every day he showed up, repairing what was broken not just in the prison, but in people like me who had forgotten they were worth fixing. When I thought about ending things, and trust me, I did, his voice was the one that kept me still. "Smoke fades," he'd say. "It always does. And when it clears, someone always sees what's been hiding in the haze." I didn't know it then, but Calder wasn't just keeping me alive. He was preparing me for the hardest part of my life. Surviving long enough for the sky to speak for me, by my 12th year inside, Calder had done something no guard, lawyer, or blood relative ever managed. He gave me direction. Not freedom, not hope. Direction. That thin, stubborn thread kept me from falling into the kind of despair that swallows a man whole. And it started with a broken mop sink. One morning in the janitor's quarter, a pipe burst under the basin, spraying grimy water across the concrete. Guards shouted. Inmates backed up. Calder just sighed like the universe had personally inconvenienced him. He knelt down, wriggled under the sink, grunted once, and then called out. "Hand me the channel locks, will you?" I blinked at him. "Me? You're the only one here with hands and ears," he replied. "Everyone else is yelling." I crouched down, passed him the tool, and for the next few minutes I watched a man who moved with slow precision, like he had all the time in the world. When he crawled back out, wiping grime off his palms, he gave me a look I still can't name. "You ever worked tools before?" "A little," I said. "Maintenance a long time ago." "You want more shifts?" He didn't say it kindly. He said it like an assessment. The next week, the warden assigned me to facility maintenance. Not glamorous work, but it came with silence, space, and purpose. Calder oversaw most of it, though he never acted like a mentor. More like someone who expected competence and let you rise or fail on your own. But he taught me, quietly, brutally, honestly. Electrical panels, pressure valves, boiler systems, lock mechanisms, HVAC units. He'd point at something, explain what it did, and then walk away, leaving me to figure out the rest, only stepping in if I was about to electrocute myself. "Don't rush," he'd mutter. "Fast hands break things. Steady hands fix them." Some nights my muscles screamed from crouching under pipes and disassembling motors, but the exhaustion felt clean, earned. It was the first time in years I felt capable of anything beyond surviving. Other inmates noticed. Guards too. They started calling me when something jammed, cracked, leaked, or sparked. For the first time, I wasn't just the school guy. I was useful. By my 15th year, I could rebuild half the facility with nothing but scrap and a handful of tools. Calder would walk into the workshop, see a machine in pieces on the table, and nod once, like I'd passed a test he never announced. "You've got a mind that works in straight lines," he said once. "Good minds do. Honest minds do." I didn't know how to respond to that. Compliments were foreign. But I held on to it, because deep down, even as I turned into something solid, steady, and dangerously good with my hands, a truth gnawed at me. Skills couldn't free me. Hard work couldn't erase 22 stolen years. Mastery couldn't break the bars. But it did something else, something I didn't understand until much later. It rebuilt me into a man strong enough to face the truth when it finally clawed its way into the light. I didn't know it then, but the craft welder taught me would become the spine of my new life, the life I'd have to build from ash. And when the sky finally exposed the lie that destroyed me, I'd be ready. It released me on a Tuesday morning, which felt cruel in its own quiet way. Tuesdays don't come with a sense of beginning or ending, they just exist. Ordinary. Forgettable. Like the world expected me to slide back into it without leaving a ripple. The gate clanged shut behind me, and the absence of its echo was almost dizzying. No shouts. No keys. No metal on metal. Just open air and a horizon that felt too wide for a man who'd spent more than 2 decades in a box. No one waited for me. My mother had passed. My father had remarried and moved states. My sister sent a letter the year before my release, a neat, guilt-soaked paragraph that said she was praying for my peace but couldn't have me around her children until the truth settled. As if truth were dust floating in the air, waiting to decide where to land. I stood on the curb with a plastic bag of folded clothes and 22 years missing from my life. A bus rolled up. The driver glanced at me the way people do when they've seen men like me before, released but not free. He didn't ask questions. I didn't offer answers. The city felt smaller than I remembered. Buildings looked shorter, streets thinner, people faster. I watched everything like a stranger stepping into someone else's memories. Even the air tasted different, cleaner, sharper, but unfamiliar. I found a room for rent above a mechanic's shop, peeling wallpaper, a mattress that sagged in the middle, a window that rattled with every passing truck. The owner didn't ask for references, just cash up front. That was all I had anyway. Finding work was harder. Every application asked for history. Every interview turned cold the moment they ran my name. The words arson and school fire carried a stink that no sentence served could wash off. One manager didn't even lower his voice. "We can't have you near anything flammable." Another pretended the position had been filled 3 minutes after shaking my hand. I stopped counting rejections after 50. The only people who didn't flinch were mechanics and contractors, the kind of workers who cared more about whether your hands were steady than your past. A small HVAC company finally hired me after I diagnosed a faulty blower motor just by listening to it. The owner was blunt. "You work hard. You stay out of trouble. I don't care what they say you did. But don't bring problems here." Fair enough. The first time I put on the uniform, it felt wrong. Like I was trespassing in a life that belonged to the version of me who never got arrested outside Miller's diner. But slowly, painfully, work became something like breathing. Familiar. Straightforward. Repairs couldn't judge me. Machines didn't listen to rumors. Still, every night when I lay in that sagging mattress, the same truth pressed against my ribs. I was living a life built on a lie I didn't commit. And the people who put me in that cell were still out there, sleeping peacefully. I didn't know where the first crack would appear. I didn't know how the truth would return. I didn't know the sky had been recording everything. But I felt it, that quiet tension before something breaks. I just didn't expect the break to come from an image taken from hundreds of miles above the earth. And when it finally surfaced, the world that forgot me would be forced to remember everything. It happened on a job I almost turned down, a service call for a small engineering office on the edge of town. The rooftop unit kept tripping the breaker, and they needed someone as soon as possible. Nothing unusual. Nothing dramatic. Just another day keeping myself too busy to drown in the past. The building smelled like dust and old carpet. I followed the receptionist upstairs to a conference room stacked with rolled blueprints and buzzing fluorescent lights. While I waited for the manager, my eyes drifted to a massive monitor mounted on the wall. A slideshow was playing: satellite imaging, topographical maps, thermal scans. High-altitude data. Nothing a man like me should have cared about. But then the next image blinked onto the screen. A timestamp in the corner. A date that hit me in the chest like a hammer. The night the school burned. I froze. Completely. The room didn't tilt, but something inside me did. My heartbeat slowed until I could feel each thud like a fist against bone. The satellite photo showed a clear overhead view of the county, the school, the surrounding roads, the diner, the highways, every street lit or dark. Everything was mapped in sharp lines and faint heat signatures. And there, unmistakably, blowing on the asphalt of the diner parking lot, was my truck. At 1:17 a.m. The exact time the fire started. Timestamped. Geo-locked. Precise. I stepped closer, unable to breathe. The receptionist said something behind me, but her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. The next slide auto-advanced. Another angle. Still 117. My truck parked in the exact same spot. Then another. And another. Different imaging modes, infrared, wide field, high resolution, each one capturing the same truth the world refused to believe. I wasn't at the school. I wasn't running from anything. I was drinking coffee miles away while someone else lit the world on fire. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I gripped the back of a chair, knuckles white. 22 years of disbelief, of mockery, of whispered doubts, of maybe he did it, of family disappearing, of judges frowning, of guards spitting at my feet, it all crashed into me at once. When the manager finally walked in, he jumped at the sight of me standing inches from his screen. "You all right?" he asked. I swallowed. Where did you get these?" He shrugged. "Old project archive. We used to pull weather satellite data for wildfire pattern studies. That one's from early 2000s, I think." My pulse hammered. "Do you keep full records?" He frowned, confused. "Of course. Every image, every timestamp." I forced myself to breathe. "Slow. Controlled." Calder's voice echoed in the back of my mind. "Steady hands, steady mind." "Could I make a copy?" I asked, trying to sound like my life didn't depend on his answer. He hesitated. "Company policy doesn't." I reached into my wallet. I didn't have much, but I pulled out everything I had and placed the folded bills on the table. "Please," I whispered. "Just that one image. Just the original resolution." He studied me for a long moment, brows drawn, mouth tight, then finally sighed. "Give me a minute." He returned with a USB drive. "This stays between us," he said. "And I didn't give it to you." I nodded, but my mind was miles away, racing ahead. I walked out of that building with 22 years of my life sitting inside a small plastic drive in my pocket. My hands shook for the first time in over a decade. Not from fear. From certainty. A single pixel in the sky had just cracked the lie they built around me. And I was finally, ready to pull the whole damn truth out of the fire that swallowed my life. I didn't go home. I couldn't. My body moved on instinct, carrying me straight to the place I'd avoided for 22 years, the county archives building. It was late, just past dusk, the kind of quiet hour when the world loosens its grip and shows you its cracks. I walked through the double doors, USB drive burning a hole in my pocket, and headed straight for the public records desk. The clerk recognized my last name. I saw it, that flicker of unease, that tiny tightening around the mouth people get when they're face to face with a ghost they thought they'd buried. But she didn't ask questions. She just buzzed me through. I wasn't there for files on me. I was there for files on them. The investigators. The expert witnesses. The so-called eyewitness whose vague description became a noose around my neck. Every single person who shaped the lie. Most files were digital now, but older cases lived in metal drawers that smelled like dust and forgotten sins. I read until my eyes burned, flipping through reports written in the cold, smug language people use when they think they're right. Every page felt like a match being held under my ribs. And then I found it, a memo tucked inside a supplemental report, buried under pages that had never been shown to the defense. A note from the fire marshal. 2 sentences that made my hands curl into fists. Origin point inconsistent with suspect's alleged route. Recommend re-interview of administrative staff due to access discrepancies. The marshal flagged concerns. He saw gaps. He questioned the narrative. But someone shut him down. I dug deeper, and the next file made my stomach turn. A reprimand, internal, unofficial, for a janitor at the school. Suspicious activity after hours. Unauthorized access to the science wing 2 nights before the fire. I knew that name. Henry Dalton. The same man who testified at my trial. The eyewitness. The man who claimed he saw someone running from the building even though smoke hadn't been visible yet. A man who should never have been near that wing in the first place. My pulse slowed. My breathing steadied. My world narrowed into a single, razor-fine line. I kept reading. Financial trouble. Gambling debts. Overtime requests denied. A grievance filed, angry, volatile, weeks before the fire. A disciplinary note about tampering with storage rooms. And then, the final cut. A confidential report from a school board member warning that Dalton might be unstable, and had threatened to make them all pay. No one ever brought this up in court. No one ever connected the dots. Or maybe they did, and chose not to. Because the next file proved what I already suspected: the lead detective had been warned about Dalton. Twice. He ignored both reports. Instead, they picked me, a man who'd been fired from the school the year before, a man with no power, no money, no allies. A convenient villain to slap onto a tragedy no one had the courage to investigate properly. My chest burned not with rage, but with something sharper. Something cold. A blade drawn slowly from its sheath. I printed the documents, folded them carefully, placed them in the same pocket that held the USB drive. The truth wasn't just a spark anymore. It was a fuse. All I needed now was the person at the other end of it, the detective who'd grin through my sentencing like he was watching justice happen instead of burying it. He lived 5 miles from the archives. A nice neighborhood. A quiet street. And while I didn't plan on violence, revenge isn't blood, it's exposure, I did plan to look him in the eyes. To watch recognition spread across his face when I told him the sky had been watching. That the truth he buried had finally climbed out of the grave. And that I was there to pull the rest of his lies out into the open, one by one, until the whole rotten structure collapsed. I didn't knock right away. I stood on the detective's porch, his name still etched in my memory like a burn mark, Detective Markson, listening to the muffled sound of a television somewhere inside, the clink of dishes, the easy rhythm of an ordinary life. A life he built on the ashes of mine. My hands didn't shake. My breathing didn't break. Calder taught me better than that. Steady hands, steady mind. I pressed the doorbell. Markson answered in a t-shirt and pajama pants, hair grayer, face softer, age dulling him in ways the years sharpened me. He looked at me for half a second like I was a stranger, and then something behind his eyes flickered. Fear. Memory. Recognition carving through 22 years. You, he breathed. That's right, I said quietly. He tried to shut the door. I caught it with my palm. Not forceful, not threatening, just enough to remind him I wasn't the same broken man he'd thrown to the flames. I'm not here for revenge, I said. Not the kind you're thinking. He swallowed hard. What do you want? Truth. The word made him flinch harder than any blow could have. I stepped into the doorway but didn't cross the threshold. I have something you should see. I took out the USB drive and the folded documents. His eyes locked onto them like they were dynamite, and they were. Not physical, but powerful enough to blow decades of his justice wide open. What is that? He whispered. Proof, I said. Satellite imaging from the night of the fire. My truck parked at the diner. Time-stamped. Clearly visible. Miles from the school. His jaw tensed. That doesn't mean. It shows me still there at 1:17 a.m. He stopped talking. Because he remembered the timestamp. Every investigator does. It was supposed to be airtight. I kept going. And I've got internal memos from the marshal. Reports about Dalton you ignored. Warnings. Access discrepancies. A confidential file stating he might be unstable. I unfolded the papers one by one, letting him see the damning headers. Markson stepped back like each page slapped him across the face. I didn't, he started. Yes, I snapped, my voice low, contained. You did? He looked at the floor. His voice dropped to a thin whisper. I had pressure from above. The board. The administration. The public. A school burns down, everyone wants a villain, fast. You fit. I fit, I repeated, tasting the bitterness of it. You argued. You've been fired. You were there that night. I was drinking coffee, I cut in. Like a normal person trying to survive. Markson rubbed his face, shoulders shaking with the weight of the life he'd built on ruins. I never thought the case would stick. I assumed your lawyers would. I don't know. Find something. Fight harder. Someone else would correct it. I didn't think. You didn't think my life mattered enough to protect, I finished for him. He didn't deny it. He just sat down heavily on the stairs inside his doorway, like the truth itself had knocked the strength out of his legs. Please, he whispered. What are you going to do with all this? I crouched down so we were eye level. I wanted him to see my face. Not anger. Not hatred. Just the cold, clean edge of resolve. I'm going to do what you didn't, I said. I'm going to tell the truth. His mouth opened, but no words came. Because he knew what would happen, his career, his reputation, the entire investigation, the court's credibility, the school board, The administration, all of it would crumble once the world saw this guy had been watching. "I'm giving you one chance," I said. "One opportunity to come forward before this goes public. Because once it's out, you'll just look like another coward scrambling for a lifeline." His breathing hitched. I don't know if I can." "You're out of choices," I said. Then I stood, turned, walked off his porch without slamming the door, without raising my voice, without violence. Revenge didn't need fire. It needed truth. And the sky had just testified on my behalf. By the time I reached the sidewalk, I heard it, Arson sobbing. The quiet, gutted kind of crying that comes from a man watching his carefully built life unravel. Good. Let him feel the smoke now. Let him choke on it the way I did. Tomorrow, the world would hear everything. And the truth would burn brighter than any fire ever could. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of adrenaline, not because of fear, because silence finally felt heavy enough to carry. I sat at the small desk in my rented room, the USB drive plugged into my old laptop, the satellite images glowing in the dark like fragments of a forgotten truth. Every minute that passed, the weight in my chest shifted from agony to purpose. By sunrise, I had everything organized, the images, the memos, the suppressed reports, the marshal's warnings, the evidence that should have freed me before I ever saw a courtroom. And more importantly, Arson's shaken, broken face replaying in my mind, the truth finally cracking through the facade he'd worn for 2 decades. He wouldn't come forward. Men like him don't confess. They keep their heads down and hope the storm passes. But this storm was mine. I called the only attorney willing to meet with me, a sharp, unflinching woman named Radha Singh. When I showed her the satellite images, her mouth tightened into a thin line. When she read the memos, her jaw clenched. When I told her what Arson admitted, her eyes sharpened like a blade. "This isn't just wrongful conviction," she said. "This is institutional negligence. Suppressed evidence. Malicious prosecution. If we handle this correctly, they will fold." She didn't ask if I wanted justice. She asked how public I wanted it. I answered without hesitation. "Very." Within days, she arranged a meeting with an investigative journalist, the kind who doesn't blink at powerful enemies. He listened to my story quietly, tapping his pen, piecing timelines together. When I showed him the satellite proof, he sat back, stunned. "You understand what this means, right?" he said. "This isn't just innocence. This exposes the entire foundation of the case." Good. He worked fast. And when the story broke, it detonated. Framed by fire, satellite footage returns to clear man after 22 years. The images spread like wildfire. The timestamp, the truck, the diner lights. News anchors replayed the footage of my prison release beside the original accusations, questioning how a system could fail so catastrophically. Then came the real reckoning. The fire marshal publicly confirmed his concerns were ignored. Dalton, the janitor, now in a nursing facility, was interviewed by investigators. He didn't confess outright, but the cracks in his story exposed everything. The school board issued a frantic statement insisting they relied on police expertise. And Arson? He tried to make a statement, but the press devoured him. His shaky answers, his evasions, they only made him look guiltier. The state attorney general held a press conference on the courthouse steps, cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward. And when she announced my exoneration, she didn't look proud. She looked afraid. A week later, the settlement was approved, the largest payout in the state's history for a wrongful conviction. Enough zeros to make people gasp. Enough to erase the financial ruins of my life, but not the years stolen. Then came the apology. Public. Televised. Scripted. Hollow. Officials stood behind a podium and read statements about regret and oversight and deep sorrow for the miscarriage of justice. But I didn't attend. I sent a message through my attorney. If they want my forgiveness, they'll wait another 22 years. What I did attend was something far quieter, a visit to Calder's grave. He'd passed 2 years before I got out. No family. No memorial. Just a small stone with his name carved plain and humble. I crouched beside it, placed my palm on the cold granite, and whispered. "You were right. Smoke clears." Then I stood and faced the world with a spine made of everything they tried to break. They stole 22 years from me. I took their careers, their reputations, their comfort, their peace. Piece by piece, truth by truth, with the precision of a man who spent half his life repairing what others destroyed. Revenge didn't need fire. Justice was the fire. And I walked through it without burning.